What is ZEA? ZEA doesn't actually stand for anything, and it's more the shortened version of the actual chemical's name, zearalenone, which sounds a lot like the country Sierra Leone, and I'm definitely going to accidentally say the country's name instead of the chemical's name, so I'm just going to refer to it as ZEA throughout this video. Now, to look at the structure of ZEA, you're going to have a diphenyl ring, which is then attached to a big massive ring which contains a whole bunch of different functional groups on it. You've got a ketone on the other end, you've got an ester, and you've got an alkene. It's a very, very interesting looking molecule structure-wise. But why am I talking about ZEA? Where the hell is this random ZEA chemical found inside of society? Now, ZEA is a mycotoxin, meaning it's found in funguses and molds, and it's potentially carcinogenic and has a whole other bunch of nasty health effects as well. Now, what kind of mold is ZEA found in? There are loads of different kinds of molds. You've got the mold that sort of appears on stale bread, the mold that can appear on damp surfaces, and there's loads of different kinds of molds. The molds that can appear on out-of-date fruit, maybe. But the ZEA mold is found inside of wheat, corn, sorghum, and rye crops. These 4 crops can be affected by ZEA. Now, before these crops are harvested, in some low-quality crop environments, it may get quite damp. And during these pre-harvest damp conditions, ZEA can set in and start to make these crops mouldy just before they've been harvested. And so when they're harvested, while it may contain some detectable levels of ZEA in them, it's not at a detectable level where you can visibly see that these chemicals or that these crops have become mouldy because of ZEA. So some big companies who are responsible for the harvesting and production of these crops, if they want to make their costs as cheap as possible, they're gonna cut it really fine with the quality of these grains. And when you're cutting it fine in this kind of sense, you're then messing with these chemicals such as ZEA, which could then potentially be in the grain when it's time to process them and use it in different kinds of food. So low quality grain has very high levels of ZEA inside of it because it's in this low quality condition that could be quite damp. It's harvested poorly, it won't be really checked for any mold. So even if there is like a tiny bit of visible mold, it won't really be checked vigorously enough for it to actually be noticed by the naked eye at all. And it's just going to be chucked into wherever it's chucked into, and then it's going to be taken away and used for whatever kind of consumer use or environmental use it's going towards. Now, if you think of a big company such as Nestle is one of the big 7 food companies, and these 7 food companies basically own every single brand of food that you will see in a supermarket. And so Nestle is responsible for the production of these crops and these goods, and because they want to make their costs as cheap as possible to make a higher profit, yeah, they are going to cut it fine. And with a product such as Cheerios, with products such as General Cereals, ZEA has been found in quantities inside of these cereals. I made a video on this in the past. It's called the Big Cheerio Scam. You can search it up on my channel. If you want to hear me talk about the ZEA side of things, then skip to 6 minutes. But while the grain that would have been used to make the Cheerios and the cereals wouldn't have been so high in ZEA that it was genuinely going to debilitate a human, the grain that is used as feedstock for animals will be very low quality and probably will have a high level of visible mold on it. And so these animals, these cows, these pigs, these sheep, when they're in the sort of intensive farming environment, so that means not grass-fed, they're literally in stables all day, barely any sunlight, and they're going to be fed this mouldy-ass grain, and that's going to infect them with ZEA. That means the ZEA is going to be inside of the cows and the pigs, and that also means that the ZEA is going to be inside of the meat that we eat, the milk that we drink. And that's probably even more of a cause for concern than the cereals, because this is going to be a very high quantity of ZEA because the mouldy grain that was used was such low quality in the first place, and that's going to transfer into the animal, which is then going to transfer into us, and there's a lot of bioaccumulation of these toxins happening there. And as well as the fact that it can potentially cause cancer, it's not like a class 1 carcinogen, meaning it is definitely causes cancer in humans. It's more like class 3 carcinogen, which means, yeah, it may cause cancer in animals and may cause cancer in humans, essentially. And so it's not really gonna have a lot of regulations on it, especially with the feedstock and stuff like that. But while it isn't very carcinogenic, it is something known as a mycoestrogenic, which means it is able to fit inside of estrogen receptors, and because it is from mold, it is known as mycoestrogenics. And these are quite a big class of estrogenics. There are a lot of mycoestrogenics out there. ZEA is just one that is known to me because I've done a bit of research on it before in the past, and so I thought I'd make a modern video on it talking about this side of the equation. And just like the synthetic stuff such as BPA, it will fit into the receptor. If you look at the structure of estrogen compared to ZEA, it's not entirely different, to be honest. You've got that phenyl ring that is exactly the same as estrogen, and as well as BPA as well. So that's normally the part of the molecule that is normally able to estrogenically interact with these receptors. And then you've got other ketone groups, and you've got other things that can accept hydrogen bonds as well. So there's going to be a lot of different stuff going on there, and it might not even just be estrogenic. It is just quite an endocrine disrupting and biologically active chemical in general. ZEA alone is found in around 25% of food in, I guess, supermarkets and stuff. And then mold itself, while it's not visible, can be detected in 60 to 80% of foods. The fact that there is a lot of low quality farming and harvesting going on that these big companies are responsible for, because they are just trying to decrease their costs as much as possible, they are pushing it very, very fine, and this can have bad effects. But simply put, buying high quality grain avoids this issue completely with any kind of mold that isn't just ZEA. In the future, when I'm an adult and I have access to my own house, I have a lot more independence, the kind of grain that I'm going to buy is not going to be one that's contaminated with ZEA. I don't currently eat any kind of breakfast cereals anyway, like Cheerios and stuff like that. I have oats in porridge, and God knows how estrogenic those oats could potentially be with the certain kinds of molds that could be in very small quantities contained inside of those oats. It's a genuinely worrying prospect that there are these molds inside of food that can't quite be seen, but they can be detected by chemical detecting processes, and they might be at a level where it can genuinely cause harm to the body. As well as its estrogenic and potentially carcinogenic properties as well, it can do things to your gut and cause chronic gut issues as well. All these molds and stuff are genuinely big issues to society, and as I say, when I'm older, I'm genuinely going to make sure that to properly research about the kinds of grains that I am buying. Like, is this genuinely going to contain mold, or is it just like a normal food? Food shouldn't really contain mold. Food that we eat shouldn't really contain like any kind of moldy chemical, any kind of chemical that is derived from mold. It should be grown and harvested in a high quality environment instead of a low quality environment to try and like edge it with their costs. That just seems like a dumb decision to make, in all honesty, especially when you're a big company. You're going to be making a heck ton of money anyway. There's really no point in putting yourself under this potential future public scrutiny if scandals about this eventually come out, as more people start to realise this and talk about this. But with that, I recommend subscribing for more content like this, and have a good day.